Welcome back. Looking at some news to do with Heritage Month. The House of Mofolo is marking South Africa's Heritage Month by celebrating the voices of African ancestors by showcasing a volume anthology of classic African literature, which is being published on the blockchain as NFT Books. So this is in association with the International African Institute in London and the Morija Museum and Archives in Lesotho. The anthology includes a new family edition of Thomas Mofolo's classic South African novel, Chaka, and a copy of the author's firstborn son's classic Sesotho novel, Pakana Tswana, that has recently been translated into English for the first time. The anthology is set to be released on the 12th of September and is being produced in collaboration with Bookwire, a German digital publishing technology company, which recently launched a new blockchain publishing platform called Creatokia. Only 5,000 copies of the anthology will be available exclusively in South Africa. 1,000 copies of the NFT book and selected chapters with new artwork will be available to the global audience. Right, let's talk a little bit more about this. We are joined now by Thomas Mofolo's grandson. That's Thomas Mofolo. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Greetings to Biso, and thank you for having me. Hello to everyone at home.
So let's just talk about the new family edition of the classic. Tell us a little bit more about the process and how it came about.
Sure. Well, just to clarify a few details there, I'm actually the great-grandson.
Okay.
Right, and...
You would be.
Correct. This is a very near and dear project to my heart. So it's been a labor of love over the past 12 months just in securing the rights.
So of these 3 books, which one is it?
So these first 2 books are Chaka. So Chaka was the 3rd novel that Thomas Mofolo wrote, and the last novel. And it was written in the first decade of the 20th century and then only translated in English in the 1930s or so. And Pakana Tswana was his firstborn son, whose name is also Thomas's first book. So
we'll get to Pakana Tswana, but I want to look at these first 2 editions. If you can just give us the distinction between the 2. And I want to talk about the metamorphosis of where we are now and why.
Sure. So the book was written between 1909 and 1910. And we don't have quite specific dates as yet because there was a delay in when the book was being published because of controversies surrounding the nature of the content of the book, deviating away from the Christian content that was used to being published at the time. So as you mentioned in the introduction, the book is being published in association with the Morija Museum and Archives. And in those days, the only printing press in Lesotho was in Morija. However, it was run by the missionaries, the Paris evangelical missionaries who'd established a printing press in the area. And obviously, just due to the nature of their work, a lot of the literature they tended to produce was promoting Christian values. However, the narrative of Chaka has nothing to do with that in the sense that it's giving a story that presents a narrative of pre-colonial Africa. So although the book was written in the first decade, between 1909 and 1910, the actual publication was only later on in the 1920s. So the reason for this is still very highly debated as to what actually happened. Was it because the missionaries didn't want to present this story that would be too controversial, or, you know, was it because of other personal matters in my great-grandfather's life that may have just led him to be disillusioned with writing at the time? And only later, when he came back to Lesotho after stopping writing, was the book then returned to the public sphere. But
a little bit more about the content for those who would not be familiar with it. It's considered a genuine masterpiece of the African narrative of the time. So people who would, so it's way before you were even a thought. So talk to us a little bit more about it and how people as young as you or those younger who could relate to it and why it's an important masterpiece.
Sure. Well, the book is considered a masterpiece because it presents a pre-colonial perspective of Africa, one that specifically shows the African way of living prior to the colonial era. However, it's not entirely a historically factual narrative in the sense that it tells the life and story of Chaka exactly as it happened. So what Ntate Mofolo, we're told, did in his research was go to KZN on a number of occasions by bicycle to gather all the historical facts about his life, but then he used his own poetic license to tell a greater story of what we've now come to term as Ubuntu or Boto in Sesotho. So unfortunately, there is still controversy regarding the interpretation even of the text.
Why is that?
Because certain people think that it's actually promoting Christian values in, denigrating African values, because Chaka is presented as an innocent young lad at the beginning of the story who, through witchcraft and sorcery and personal ambition, deviates from his African values and goes on this pillage of destruction. But indeed, he's not so much deviating from Christian values, but deviating from that spirit of Ubuntu, which the expansive philosophy of Ubuntu really does promote, the life force which brings us in peace with ourselves and the universe. And Antikor has actually written a foreword to this new family edition that we're publishing, presenting this new interpretation and analysis that it's actually got nothing to do with the Christian narrative per se, but how there is a danger in us as Africans departing from our values imparted by our ancestors can corrupt us.
Now, I want to talk about Pakana Tswana being, I believe this is the first time that it's been translated into the English language, and how that, carries forward with that journey. And I say that because I know, with any piece of art, you'll find that it's multi-layered, and often you can read, watch the same thing, or listen to the same thing and have different perspectives, because the intention often is that the writer or the author or whatever at that time is themselves also self-excavating. So, I can understand why some people would have different perspectives, but as you say, it just keeps on evolving with the times.
Indeed, indeed. What's special about Pakana Tswana was that it's considered somewhat of a sequel to Chaka, but it was written by Ntate Thomas in a period in time where he was drafted into the Second World War. And this happened to be the same period that his father, Thomas Mofolo, passed on as well. So there's so much interesting speculation that, in fact, Pakana Tswana may have been started by his father and wasn't completed, and then he picked up the manuscript and went on to complete it. But
that's quite interesting.
There's no actual factual evidence to verify that. But it was written so well and continues the narrative that was begun in Chaka in such an interesting way, which is why people have taken on that perspective.
Now, I wonder, is there anything lost in the original language in which it's written to the translation? Because the prism through which etymology is then seen can also add a different flavor.
Yes, indeed. So Ntate Mofolo, when he wrote this, in part of his research, got a lot of the folklore from the Zulus, and he wrote the original text in Sesotho. The English one was only translated in the 30s by an Englishman called F.H. Dutton. And, as much as it was celebrated internationally, a lot of local scholars were saying, hang on, so much has been lost in this English translation that is not as rich or as nuanced as the original Sesotho. So this new family edition that we're republishing is translated by the late scholar Daniel Kunene, who is South African, but spent the latter of his career in the States and passed on, unfortunately, a few years ago. But he translated the narrative, he translated the book twice. And this new family edition is a second, more recent translation. But in producing this second translation, he gives an introduction into how difficult it was to capture the details in the original Sesotho.
So, quickly before I let you go, the collaboration with Bookwire, the German digital publishing technology company, what is that going to bring for the book, other work surrounding Ntate Mofolo, but just not only you as your descendants, but I'd consider us all as young or old Africans who would have been imagined into this story?
Sure. Well, I think a greater talking point that makes this project that much more special is the nature of how it's being published on the blockchain. I think what we've seen over the past decades or centuries or so is that unfortunately a lot of people in the creative economy have to give over their work to major distributors in order for it to get global awareness. But the special thing about the blockchain is it allows us as his descendants and those who invest in it and buy a copy or an NFT to have actual ownership and be able to resell it, which is very different from secondary publishers or distribution channels like your exclusive books or Amazon, wherever. This is indeed novel in the sense that as Africans, it gives us ownership over our stories because unfortunately, like I said at the beginning, I had to jump through hurdles to secure the rights to republish this because as his family members, we don't own the license to these works.
Though?
It is insane. And thankfully, because of the fourth industrial revolution that we're in, new modes of distribution and technology are available, which give us as Africans the opportunity to now reclaim our ancestors' works, our songs, and so forth.
I'm told I have to end our time, but I have to ask this. What made you interested in carrying forth the baton, the generational baton, your relationship with Dr. Thomas Mofolo? You definitely would not have been born, but that connection.
For me, it started as a scholar during my decolonial journey. So throughout my entire upbringing, he was just always a distant figure to me. But just following on what's transpired in our country over these past 5 years or so with the Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall movement, which called for free decolonized education, that really did bring about a strong sense of Black consciousness in me to know myself. And that then led me down the path of knowing my heritage and who my ancestors were. And in doing so, waking me up to the importance of honoring their legacy by reminding my generation of their stories and the significance of honoring those who came before us and continuing with their stories.
We certainly are grateful that young people like you are carrying forth that legacy. There's Thomas Mofolo, who is the great-grandson of Thomas Mofolo. That's where we're going to leave it for now. Do look out for those works during this Heritage Month and various festivals as well. It will be online as well.